Good afternoon. Everybody is awake. Welcome to AmCham and to what will definitely be a wonderful and lively discussion this afternoon. My name is Anne-Marie Balfe. I am the co-chair of the Women of Influence Committee here at AmCham, a position that I'm thrilled to be in. I absolutely love it. Every year we host the Women of Influence Awards and Conference, which is in November every year, and we also have an opportunity to host events like today, where we get to share with you research that's happening in the Hong Kong market or inspirational women. And men. I'm delighted to have a wonderful panel here today to speak with you. And I'm going to hand over to Fern in just a minute to do all of the introductions. Just before I do that, I'd like to draw attention to the badges that you're all wearing. So as you can see, some of us have different coloured badges. I'm a yellow badge because I'm a member of one of the committees. For those of you who have grey badges, you're non-members of AmCham, and we would love you all to become members of AmCham. So please do take an opportunity to register and become a member of the AmCham family. We host a wonderful array and a wonderful number of events every year. We obviously welcome you as non-members as well, but we'd love you to become part of the AmCham family too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Fern, who will introduce all of the panel. Thank you all very much for coming, and I hope you enjoy the event. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Fern Ngai. I'm the CEO of Community Business. And thank you all for coming and having your lunch here today. In case you haven't noticed, there's some publications on your seat. Now, those aren't there meant to be boosters for your seats. And apologize for the paper, but there are pieces of research, recent research on women on boards and diversity on boards, so I hope you find them useful. I'm going to first introduce our esteemed panel. First of all, on my right, Nick Sauno-Smith. Nick is very prominent in Hong Kong business. He's the chairman and independent non-exec director of the Link Management since 2007. He has over 38 years of experience in the finance and treasury field in the UK and Hong Kong, with extensive knowledge of the property investment and management industry here. He was the CEO of Hong Kong Land from 2000 to 2007. He has a number of board roles besides the Link, Wynn Macau, Unitech Corporate Parks PLC in the UK, and Aviva Life Insurance in Hong Kong. And he's very active in public service. He's a member of the Council of the Treasury Markets Association. He was the chair of the General Committee of BritCham for the last three years, chairman of the very fabulous Hong Kong Youth Arts Foundation, a counselor of the Foundation of the Arts for the Arts and Music in Asia, and director of the Photographic Heritage Foundation. Wow, you pack a lot into your day, Nick. And then next we have Doreen. Doreen Lee is exec director of the Wharf Holdings Limited. She joined Wharf 30 years ago in 1984. I think she was probably 5 years old at the time. She's been a director of Wharf since 2003 and became an exec director in 2007. She is the senior managing director of Harbour City Estates, Times Square, and Plaza Hollywood. Okay. Vice Chairman and Senior MD of Wharf China Estates Limited and Wharf Estates Limited, as well as Director of other subsidiaries in the group. She's responsible for overseeing the investment properties of the group in Hong Kong and China. And that includes, besides the ones I just mentioned, properties in Shanghai, Chongqing, Wuhan, Dalian, etc. And she's the non-exec director of Joyce Boutique Holdings since 2003. And by the way, she's the only female out of the board of 6 at Joyce. So now this is a woman that's surrounded by a lot of shopping opportunities all the time. There must be tons and tons of temptations. And the Wharf has 2 female directors on its board of 14 directors. And last but not least, Nick Marsh. He's the managing director of Harvey Nash Exec Search APAC. Nick has over 20 years of experience in exec search. He built and ran Harvey Nash's exec search business as Global MD and moved out to Hong Kong in early 2012 to drive the company's expansion into this region, and currently sits on the exec committee of this US $1 billion public company. Harvey Nash has partnered with the University of Hong Kong Executive Education of the Faculty of Business and Economics to create the Women's Directorship Program. And this is aimed at increasing the supply of board-ready women. In 2008, Harvey Nash founded Inspire, a platform for top women in board positions. Inspire facilitates meetings and connections across industries and sectors and has a membership base of over 3,000 board-ready women. And this network started in the UK and it spread across to the US, Asia Pacific, Hong Kong, etc. So this is, Harvey Nash is a company that's very serious about women on boards. Okay, so before we get into the panel discussion, I'd like to maybe set some context by talking about the latest statistics. So you'll have a copy of the report. So I just want to pick out some of the highlights. In the last year and a half, the needle has barely moved. In fact, since 2009, I would say that the needle has barely moved. So the percentage of women on the Hang Seng Index boards was 8.9% back in 2009, and it's currently 9.6%. Earlier this year, when this report was published, out of a total of 668 directorships on the Hang Seng Index, only 64 were held by women. So I just looked at the numbers again just a few days ago and found that out of 685 directorships, only 66 are held by women. So that's just 2 additional women in the last 5 months. So you could see this is a very, very slow, sort of glacial pace of change. When looking more closely at the flow of the women into board positions, of the 83 new director appointments in the last year, just 8 directorship roles were appointed to 5 women. So this shows that the flow is slowing from 11.7% the previous year to 9.6%. So the numbers are not getting better. Disappointingly, the number of women who hold Hang Seng Index directorships has remained static at 53 since last year, with only an increase of 6 women since 2009. Worse still is that the number of female exec directors has not changed since 2009, stalling at 15, which is 28.3% of all female directors. This is about half compared to Singapore's listed companies, which have 49% female exec directors. So the number of female exec directors is an important indicator because it indicates the female pipeline within organizations and whether they're creating the right environment or culture for women to reach the top. On a slightly positive note, this year we recorded the lowest number of companies with no female directors. It's now down to 16 out of the 50, which is 32%. Okay, so assuming an increase of 3 female directorships each year and the total directorships remain unchanged at 670, it would take 45 years to reach 30% and 90 years for parity. So extremely, extremely slow. And compared to a number of other countries, UK is already at 20.4%, Australia 17.3%, and that's without quotas. The US is close to 17%. Okay. So that's all I wanted to say about the numbers. They're actually quite disappointing. So I'd like to first start the panel discussion by asking a question to all of our panelists. Why do you think the progress has been so slow? Is it because of the lack of supply of talented women, or is it because of demand? Is it because of mindsets, the old boys club, etc.? And what do you think it would take for this to change? So I'd like to, at the risk of showing bias towards females, ask Doreen to try to respond to that question first.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I I'm more positive than that. You know, I believe the trend is changing. As I've seen, more female executives rising to higher ranks. And in fact, my company, the ratio of senior female executives is 50-50. And in certain departments, like the retail leasing department, I sometimes question why they're not hiring men anymore. What's happening? Maybe because of women tend to have this inborn shopaholic DNA, which men may not possess. I can see that this trend is starting to reverse, and I'm quite comfortable in 10 or 15 years' time, there will be many more directors appearing in boards. Take, for instance, WOF has 2, me and Yang Lang. And then I must say, as a woman, we are born with certain instincts and characteristics that it's very hard to remove. Just like we tend to be more nurturing, we tend to be more motherly, and we tend to facilitate more. So when it comes to a situation when you have a family, you have to decide which direction you should move, especially now in Hong Kong. Opportunities exist across the border. There are many opportunities exist across the border. And if you have family, they have to make a choice whether, if your husband, for instance, at one moment, my husband came to me and said, there's a job opportunity in Shanghai. And I looked at him and said, oh, are you going to take it? And he's looking at me and say, should I take it? Well, we had to have a very long hours deliberation on this topic. And I have to use my soft tactics to convince him that if I tell him, no, you know what happened. To convince him that the family values much more important than just career advancement. On the other hand, of course, because we evaluate the situation that my income probably exceeds his, even if he goes to Shanghai. So on the overall situation, we managed to have this sort of conclusion that we should sort of stick to the family value, and we all stay in Hong Kong. You go for another job instead of going to Shanghai for opportunity. So things like that happen, and women tend to be the one who give up to facilitate to the family. I think as time progresses, with the help of more domestic helpers and tutors, I'm sure women are given more opportunities to assert themselves. So I'm quite positive there will be many more directors coming on board.
Okay, good. Nick, sorry, we have 2 Nicks today.
Okay, I'll English Nick. Thanks. Yeah, I want to give a little bit more subtlety about why it's not happening that fast. I mean, one of the reasons is that you don't include my company in your statistics. So, and we've gone from 0 to 3 female directors in about 18 months. But because we're a trust, we're not listed on the Hang Seng Index and never will be at the current rate. So one question for Fern would be whether you could broaden the way you calculate the numbers a bit more. But the more subtle reasons why it doesn't happen faster are, first of all, directors don't retire every year. For our company, you're 9 years, 3 + 3 + 3, before you cease to be independent. So our directors, if they don't resign for other reasons, they would normally expect to stay 9 years and then leave. So the number of opportunities to appoint a new director are not going to be every year in any company. The second point is much more subtle, which is that I hope no one would be urging discriminatory appointment the other way around. In other words, the way I look at this is not that you ought to have half and half women and men on boards, but what as a board you need to do is to look at the widest talent pool. And if you're not looking at 50%, then clearly you're missing something. But that doesn't or shouldn't mean that every appointment you make from now onwards is always a woman, because then you're also only looking at half the talent pool for the next 6 years, which would also be doing a disservice to your shareholders. Now, of course, we make sure we look at the broader picture. And as Fern knows, we instruct our search company, you must have women on the shortlist. Even if you actually think they're weaker candidates, we'll make that decision, not you. So we will always look at a panel of women as well as men. But because of those two factors, this is going to be quite a long time to change. The final point I want to make, because it mystifies me a little bit, I guess from a man I have a partial perspective. But in the 20 years I've been in Hong Kong on the boards of different companies at different times, different organizations, I have never been aware of any prejudice whatsoever against appointing a woman, at executive level or on the board. I've never had any sense, well, that person won't do because it's a woman. It's other legacy factors, which is why I always emphasize diversity, as Fern knows, not gender. There have been many chairmen, and they're normally men, of boards for many decades who don't think in terms of diversity as at all. If you look at the men on their boards, they tend to be of a particular type. And not just friends of the chairman, but people who've come out of a particular type of business environment, a particular age, a particular way of thinking. And the natural approach has been for chairmen to say, let's get some like-minded people on the board. Now, I personally believe that that's not as effective as having a diverse board with a lot of different thinking, which is why I make sure we have an entrepreneur, we have somebody from the university, we have people who don't come out of the natural corporate world because they're going to talk and think in a different way. But a lot of chairmen in the past didn't think like that. They thought in terms of a particular type. And you need to get beyond that generation, I think. I think that generation of 65-year, I'm under 65 just, plus chairman, are never going to change. You're not going to go in with a piece of paper or a report and say, I'm going to change your mindset. It won't. But the next generation will be quite different. I'm absolutely convinced of that. So I would just urge patience.
Thanks. I actually don't disagree with you, Nick, at all. I think that, and I was actually saying this to Fern earlier, I do think that things will change and we will get to a far more successful outcome in terms of numbers and quantity, but that there is a roadblock at the moment, which is that a lot of the current chairmen who might be founders of their own companies will need to succeed to the next generation in their families, and those families will actually start to, as many have already done so, start to see things in a very different light. Certainly in the conversations that we have, I don't think I see that much in the change of numbers in terms of appointments. I don't think I see anything where people deliberately say, I don't want a woman. But I think they do say that they'd like somebody who's a little bit more like myself, or so it's replicating that sort of existing understanding of the same culture, same style, and so on. But I do think that there is a change in perception. I think that a lot more chairmen of listed companies and a lot more chairmen of private companies are more aware of the need for diversity, whether of gender or other. And that is absolutely coming through in many more conversations that I have in Hong Kong than I would have had 2-3 years ago. I think that is being driven by the global change that's occurring, not just necessarily in Hong Kong. We don't live in a microcosm, we live in a global economy. And around diversity, boards, best practice, there is a big change in Europe especially, less so in America. It clearly started with Norway making a case for having quotas. I personally am not a big fan of quotas at all. Our company isn't a fan of quotas, but they started the ball rolling. And today you've now got a case where the UK has voluntarily tried to change things very successfully without having quota systems. And they've moved from 12% to 21% in 4 years, I think. So they've almost doubled the number of women on boards. And the run rate of appointments are now in excess of 30%. And that that change was created by the 30% Club, where chairmen got together to say, actually, we can do something about this, and encourage each other to accelerate members of our executive boards onto non-executive positions. But you've now got a case in France where there is a semi-quota system. The whole of the European Union has now set up a system where they've effectively said by 2020 there has to be a quota. Germany, Merkel will have to now put in. So Europe is going at a very fast pace of change, whether enforced by government or exchanges or collective. There is a 30% Club in Hong Kong, which clearly is relatively recent. It was only set up last year to encourage chairmen to change their thinking. So I would say that the UK probably spent 18 months before you saw any change. And then gradually there was a degree of peer pressure or peer awareness that started to see things change. And it went slowly from 12% to 14% to 16%, and it's now 21%, and 30% and above are being appointed. In France, I think it's close to 20% now. So I do think that Hong Kong will get there. I wouldn't necessarily advocate patience. I'm an impatient person. And I think there are things that we collectively can do to encourage people. So I would say I'm marginally positive looking towards the future, marginally disappointed if I'm looking at the now.
Thank you. Okay, let's look at the business case for board diversity. Now, let's go back to the link. It's a really shining example of how fast things can change. In January 2013, the Link board had an all-male board of 12. Today, with 3 female directors out of 14, the board is 21.4% female. And including one of the board directors who was just appointed the first female CEO of Standard Chartered Hong Kong, Mei Tan. And in that period, I believe there's been no new male directors appointed. And so Nick Samuel-Smith, although you did advocate patience, you've actually done a lot in the last 18 months. Can you share about the Link's journey towards board diversity or gender diversity, the rationale, the impact it's had on your board and the boardroom dynamics, and what has been the reaction, if any, from your peers?
Well, short answer to the last point, none. On the first point, as I mentioned, we were simply making sure we looked at the whole of the talent pool. And we went into each of those appointments looking for people with a particular background. So Alan Zeman had been on the board and was not re-elected. And he was our entrepreneur. And I felt we needed somebody with an entrepreneurial background. And on the shortlist, we were presented with Elaine Young, who started Sharma Apartments here, was on the shortlist and is a female Alan Zeman. So that worked very well. We wanted somebody with a corporate finance background because apart from the executive director and me partially, none of us had that. And Mei Tan obviously had a corporate finance background. She was on the slate. Now, I was saying earlier, I don't want to suggest we should only look at the other 50% of the talent pool. But if we had a shortlist which had 2 corporate finance people, one was a man and one was a woman, I would have been biased in favour of appointing the woman for the other reasons, as long as they were equally good candidates. If the man was a better candidate, we would have appointed the man. So our ability to make that change reflected the qualities of the shortlist that the search company brought forward, and the fact that more women were putting themselves forward for these types of jobs. So the other thing we haven't talked about is the supply side, which is a reason why I'm not sure we should be targeting outcomes. In fact, I'm sure we shouldn't. A lot of men, when they hit retirement age, are desperate to stay in the loop in business and would kill to get a non-executive directorship, almost. Most women I know would never be in that position. My wife would say, why would I want to do that? Read that pile of papers every month, sit in that boardroom. I mean, I'm going to go and do something interesting. There isn't the same sort of internal social pressure on women of that age to demonstrate that they're in the loop. But men here feel that. Men in the UK feel that. So there are those reasons why you almost always will get a higher supply of men than women. So I think we will have a catch-up because people haven't been looking at that 50% of the talent pool. But we should not be targeting a percentage of anything. I don't want an LGBT percentage. I don't want an accountancy percentage. I don't want anything. Because our duty to shareholders is to appoint the best board. And on this point, I would hope that we don't end up with, and you did say peer pressure, which I think is what Mervyn has done in the UK, naming and shaming and all that stuff. And I don't approve of it, frankly. Because we should have diversity in diversity. If a board happens to think that having 10 men with a particular background is the best way of managing their business, and their shareholders, if they're a listed company, don't disagree, it is their free right to do that. We shouldn't be, mobbing outside the boardroom saying, we're going to say nasty things about you to the press until you match our model. I think that would be completely the wrong way to go. So diversity in diversity. If we all end up with every board exactly the same type of diversity, we will have lost the diversity. Companies need to behave in different ways in every part of what they do. Obviously in marketing and products and everything else. Why not from a governance point of view too?
Can you talk about the change in the boardroom dynamics with more women?
Yeah, well actually the women are now the most vocal. Maybe that is not necessarily a surprise in the room, but it's absolutely true. I find that the type of man that we were talking about earlier on, who businessman all their lives, wants to stay in the loop, doesn't mind going to a boring board meeting, they tend to be more reluctant to participate. I mean, as chairman, one of the things you have to do is to try and bring out the discussion and make sure that different viewpoints are being expressed. I never have a problem bringing out the women at all. I still have a problem with some of the more understated men, that they will hold back a little. But what you get from the diversity point, and the fact where Elaine comes from that point of view, whether she's a man or a woman, is that obviously people look at a problem from a completely different perspective. So they raise an issue that the more formulaic business approach might not have raised. So you end up with a more interesting conversation, and hopefully you get to better conclusions, because that's what it's all about. How do you make better decisions? That is one outcome that one should target. And I actually feel that we do. I feel we now have more diverse discussions on any given subject because we have a more diverse set of people.
I don't know if people have been to the Lynx properties, the wet markets and the shopping malls. There's been a huge improvement in the last year. Is that because of the female touch? Or was that part of your strategy?
It's in the pipeline, I think.
Yeah. Well, I've been very impressed. Okay, why don't we move on to Doreen? Now, Doreen, you've got a lot of experience serving on boards. Does it make a difference to the business and to corporate governance if there are women on the board?
Corporate governance, I think, is a responsibility for both men and women. Of course, I think even the SEC is making encouraging statements for companies to hire more board. And in some countries, overseas countries, they make it a rule they have to hire certain numbers of female directors. But I do think women serve a lot of purpose and help a lot in decision or in getting feedback in certain areas. For instance, WOI is very famous for its retail management expertise. Harbour City, Times Square, and all the new shopping malls we're building in China. And naturally, me and myself and Yan are both have been managing retail properties for some time. And retail contributes a very substantial components of the revenue for WOF. So, you know, certainly our perspectives will help in business growth. In a sense, our views help to determine the amount of business growth for the companies. 70% of WOF's assets are in the companies that are managing, and of which majority of income comes from the retail component. So I'm sure women will serving on board will contribute the various angles which men may have touched on. Well, women used to be more, women are usually more focused on details, while men like to look at the big picture. Of course, nowadays, women are both being able to contribute to the big picture as well as the small picture. And women, like Nick said, are very vocal nowadays. I have more staff, female staff, marching into my doors demanding for pay rise than men. So,
Okay, good. Why don't we talk a bit about family-run companies? There are many in Hong Kong. And one of the reasons that we constantly hear about why progress is so slow is that the families don't want disruption or debate, healthy debate in board meetings. They want to, keep the decisions with the family, and they want boards that are easily managed/controlled. Do you agree with this? Yeah, the wharf is run by the Wu family.
Well, I mean, I must say my boss is very open. He promote me to the board, and he promote Yan to the board as well. I do think, well, at the end of the day, companies, especially whether listed companies, whether it's family run or not, they want to have profits. They're all going after, profits. So whoever, I think, with the talent, whichever talents can help bring in the profits, well, and their opinions, adding value to the company, should be well recognized. Should be the base for them to get promoted to the board.
Okay, good. Okay, so why don't we now talk about building a pipeline of female talent within companies? And I mentioned earlier about the number of female exec directors on Hong Kong boards. Nick Sandel-Smith, besides appointing independent non-exec directors who are women, what steps are being taken by the Link to develop a pipeline of female leaders from within the organization who could eventually take up directorship role on the Link board or on other boards?
I don't think we target this in a gender way. I think actually Hong Kong, I don't know what the numbers say, but I think Hong Kong does very well. When I came here in '93 from London, I was very struck by the large number of women at senior executive levels in large businesses, not only in the banks, but also other businesses. When I was at Hong Kong Land as CEO, of the heads of department who reported to me, the treasurer was a woman, the head of HR was a woman, the head of legal was a woman, etc., etc. I mean, there were more women reporting to me than men, which surprised me. In the Link, the head of property management is a woman, the head of our investment side is a woman, the head of our asset management is a woman. Now, this has not been because we decided to go out and find a woman to do that job. There are a lot of good women in the property business, and we were again recruiting talent for its own sake, which is why I'm very confident about all of this. I think the point I made earlier is the important point, that when Peony, who runs our leasing side, decides that she wants to retire, I would guess that she will not look for 4 non-executive directorships out there to take up. I don't think that's going to happen. It's not going to be what she wants to do. But any of those women, when the current executive directors retire, would be candidates for that job. Why would they not be?
I just want to make a small plug for some research work that we're doing. We've been issuing this, it's called a Gender Diversity Benchmark for Asia a number of times, and this year we're releasing the next version of it, looking at the female representation across a number of companies, I think it's about 30, looking at the senior, middle, and the bottom levels. So that will be launched quite soon. Doreen, as a very successful business leader who has reached the top, especially in a very male-dominated industry, can you share about your own personal career journey, what challenges you may have faced, lessons learned along the way, and whether you had any sponsors or mentors who helped you?
I'm still questioning myself. I have this problem, like Sheryl Sandberg's is talking, a lot of self-doubt at times. Whether I'm successful or not, I'm not so sure yet, because every year if I can hand in double-digit increase in revenue, I'll be called successful. If I cannot, I'll have question mark all over me. When I joined WOF back in 1984, I never really never thought of how my career path would be paved out. Never. I joined WOF as an assistant estate manager. You know, I wouldn't say low rank, but sort of junior manager grade. And all I knew at the time was that, well, let's give it a go, try my best, and see how it goes. So as time progressed, I always sort of try to help others to achieve the targets, and not only my own targets, but help others. I think that's pretty, that's in the eyes of my superiors as a sign of somebody with pretty good potential. And naturally, you know, I've given more chances to do extremely stretched assignment. Each time I take on a stretched assignment, it might give me a few sleepless nights, but somehow I managed to overcome that. I mean, I can still recall back in 1991, the company decided to change the tram depot in Causeway Bay. At the time, it's not exactly Causeway Bay. It's in between Causeway Bay and Wan Chai. Now, it's Times Square. At the time, the company wanted to build a 17-story mall, plus 1 million square feet of offices. It never happened before in Hong Kong, and never happened, was never any successful example of a mall of 17 stories of 1 million square feet ever succeeded before. So it was a very, and then at that time, across the road, basically it was a tram depot with a lot of butchers across the road. Strange stuff, you know, the rats were of the size of the cats. And I had to bring clients to sort of overcome quite a bit of hurdles and mud before we went into the site. Well, that was a very big challenge. I questioned myself if I could have the ability to handle it. But I guess along the way, you know, I did have certain attributes that helped me to sort of rise through the ranks. I never say die. It's my never say die attitude. So I think what Times Square now turned out is, apart from all these political occupations from time to time at Times Square, Open Piazza, I think Times Square is viewed as one of the most successful malls in Hong Kong. So that was a very big challenge in my life. And then in 2003, it's another big challenge. It was the SARS. I'm sure some of you may recall the SARS. The whole city was suffocated by a huge sense of fear. I came back from Boston. I went to Harvard for a very short course on making changes. Maybe that helped a bit. Came back. The whole city was suffocated by a sense of fear because nobody knew what was happening. Nobody knew where it came from. And the city was literally closed down. And the government, in fact, asked people to stay at home. Wash your hands. stay at home and wash your hands again. And you know what kind of business we're running? Shopping malls, hotels. So you could, and then we've got a lot of people coming to work in our office buildings. Without people coming to work in the office building, without people coming to the malls, I mean, zero business to the retailers, and you can imagine the number of calls I receive every day asking for rent rebatement. And then you could hear from time to time certain colleagues have to got locked up in their own building because of, you know, SARS broke out in one of the flats or whatever. And we have to clean, sanitize the whole floor because, not only one floor, 7 floors above and 7 floors beneath. When in whatever floor where there was a SARS patient. So things like that happen and a lot of fear. And then I think at the time of crisis, the best in me came out. So together with my colleagues, I devised a number of, I literally sort of wiped out the entire, you call it, in disinfectant wipes supply in the market. I bought all of them. No other developers, not even Hong Kong Land had that. So I placed a lot of disinfectant wipes in all the key positions, you know. And we had a whole lot of other measures. And then I put advertisement into newspapers. And I convinced my fellow board directors not to close down the hotels. Well, you may close down the rooms, but open all the restaurants. Offer them at a discount, because at the time nobody wanted to eat by chopsticks. They were so fearful of getting infected. So we had a big campaign motivating people to coming to work, coming to dine. And in our shopping malls, we have lucky draws. We run it like a carnival. And that helped to drive a lot of business back. Maybe not to the full extent before the epidemic happened. But at least we helped. And the retailers really appreciated our efforts and our prompt action in attending to the crisis. So at that, a very memorable experience that I had. And I think that helped to anchor in my boss' mind about, the chairman's mind about my ability and my capacity. That was a very memorable, a big challenge. And then another challenge has come 2000 in the 2003, 2004, when the company decided to acquire a lot of properties in China. New territory that we never enter into. We have to buy big malls. You know, we just opened a shopping mall of 2.2 million square feet, all in one go in Chengdu. It's open, business is going from strength to strength. But we opening in one go is not easy. I'm sure Nick will tell you. One go, together with it's the size of Harbour City, basically, even bigger than Harbour City. Again, it's a very stretched assignment. And I took it on with fear, with self-doubt, but I just moved on with it, pushed along, get the whole team working together with a single objective, is get it open and get the business going. So these are I think, you know, as a woman, you have to do things like men, with gusto. Push it all out. Be vocal. Don't worry, because we have an advantage too. We can always throw in our towels. Like less society, peer pressure on us. There's nothing wrong for women to throw in the towels. So most of the time, I tend to be the devil's advocate in the board. Of course, nicely, softly, tactfully, not bluntly. Well, and that's how I got to where I am. And as for my fellow director, Yang, she's a beauty queen. She actually won a very big beauty contest back in the 1990-something. Well, for her good looks, you know, fortunately I'm a woman, so nobody doubt her rise through the ranks because of her good looks. I saw in her great ability, capacity, potentials, and naturally I groomed her. And from there, she's now part of the board since 2013, and she's helping me to look after the Hong Kong property so that I can focus most of my energy on China.
Some very good war stories. You seem to be quite fearless, taking on a huge 1 million square foot property.
The projects I'm taking on is like, they're all like Harbour City in China. So 7 million square feet in Chengdu, 9 million square feet in Changsha, and another 5 in Chongqing, you know.
Not like being thrown into the deep end. Okay, I'm conscious Nick Salmo-Smith has to leave early, so I want to ask a question around providing advice to aspiring women. You hold a number of board positions, Nick, and lots of other things as well. And as we're all very busy people, and there's only 24 hours a day, what kind of commitment is required to serve on a board, on a corporate board? How many is too many board roles? And how do you select the right board to join, assuming you get a number of offers?
Tricky. Once you join a board, you certainly get a lot more offers. Somebody once asked me, who'd never been on a board, a man, how do I get on boards? And I said, you already have to be on one, and then you'll get on them. So the starting point is always tricky. But given the lack of supply of directors compared with the demand, with the trend towards much more open governance here and, as Nick said, around the world, I think anyone who gets a position on a board will get more offers. The number that you're allowed to serve on, the Stock Exchange haven't put a number in the code. There's a suggestion that it's 5 or 6 max. The impact is not so much from the exchange, but from the proxy advisors. I don't know how many people here know who the proxy advisors are. When a listed company has a series of resolutions to be voted at an AGM, for which the major institutional shareholders will send in their proxy, ticking the boxes of where they vote, most of these institutions own shares in hundreds of companies. And some of them will effectively outsource the decision making. It's a bit like S&P and Moody's, that you now have Glass Lewis and ISS are the 2 big proxy advisor companies worldwide, have 90% market share. And a lot of these institutions will say, okay, what do you recommend we should vote? And they will make that recommendation. Now, they will typically vote against you if you have more than 5 boards. So the Stock Exchange doesn't have to do anything. It will be led by the proxy advisors. I'm on 4, and actually I think they're probably right. I would say that 5 is possibly too many, although being a chairman makes a big difference. If you were simply another board member and didn't chair any committees, probably you could cope with 5 or 6, but certainly not more than that. If you're going to put in the right effort. It's not as onerous as some of the search companies will have you believe. Let's see whether Nick agrees with this. There's a trend these days to want to oversell the dimensions of the role. And I had this, somebody rang me up and said, oh, it's in the snapshot about the job it says 22 days a year, but it's really 26. In which case I said, well, if you calculate the board fees against 26 days, why would I work for so little money? Which is actually what I felt about that. Now, my feeling is that it shouldn't be so onerous. As chairman, I think it's 20% of my time, a day a week, consistently through the year. If I was another board member and not chair, probably 10%. So you could do 5, and your 50% of your time is utilised, and you've got the other 50%, roughly, as an order of magnitude. Now, in terms of which ones you take, this is obviously the top question. And there's a lot of research and comment about how important this is. You've got to make sure the governance in the company is right, and you've got to make sure all sorts of other things so you don't risk your own reputation. The fact of the matter is, it is impossible to do enough research to check that before you start. Absolutely impossible. Where you actually know people on the board already, this is the best circumstance, because you can then talk to them about, how happy are you happy? You can use them as a benchmark, that if my friend X thinks this is a decent company, then, and I trust that person's judgment, then maybe you can make that step. But otherwise it is difficult, and given that you're not going to do more than 4 or 5, making the wrong choices is seriously bad news, quite apart from the governance issues and risk to reputation. So my basic advice would be not to accept things too quickly. That people who are reaching retirement or getting to the point where they want to build up a portfolio of these types of things would be much better off accepting one and then chilling for a while rather than accepting several, because it is a different experience being a non-executive director from being an executive, a completely different experience. Your role is different, your responsibility is different, and it's much better to get used to that. And of course, find out whether you enjoy it. I mean, you might not. You might think this is boring as hell and want to resign at the next rollover. Thank you.
Would you advocate that people go into a NGO board or a charity board as maybe a step?
I actually think companies are easier than NGOs, because, as Doreen said, there is one clear objective, which is to make money for the shareholders. And even though you may have differences about how you do that, everyone accepts that that's the objective, and therefore there's less. I find there are less personalities. There may be 2 people who are very different people. Maybe they disagree a lot, but they will sort of put those differences aside to make the right decision. Once you're in an NGO or a charity where there's no financial benchmark, then the gloves are off and people behave extraordinarily badly most of the time, my experience. So I don't think it's a preparation at all. In fact, I would advise minimizing the NGO bit and maximizing the company bit.
Well, okay, I'm the chair of Kelly Support Group, the board of Kelly Support Group, and it's a lot of heavy hitting, but I'm very passionate about the cause. So that's sort of that keeps me going. No, thank you so much. Now Nick has to leave at 1:30. Does anybody here have a burning question to ask Nick before we allow him to go?
Not particularly. I mean, certainly there are companies here that extend independent non-executive directors for 35 years. And it's one of the features of having family-controlled businesses, because if they own a big enough stake to win the vote at the AGM, they can say this person is still independent and win the vote, and they stay and stay. And there's at least some credibility. Ask Michael Kaduri this question. He will say, look, independence is an attitude of mind. It's not so many years, and there are people on his board that tell him he's wrong all the time, and they've been on the board 30 years. And to some extent, I agree with that. The trouble is not that people are not independently minded, but you get no refreshment of attitudes. You just get stuck where you were years ago. So I think the 9-year term is probably about right, and since that's London code, I think there are lots of merits in Hong Kong continuing to follow that. You won't find everyone stays 9 years. I mean, some people might leave after 6, or they might not get re-elected for one reason or another. So you'll get a bit more refreshment than that implies. Yes, I think it's getting very difficult because of the criminalisation of issues like price-sensitive information and so on, where directors, all directors, not just independents, but Doreen too, have a criminal liability if something is not done correctly. And ignorance is not an excuse. If the systems didn't escalate the information to the board, well, you should have made sure the systems were in place that did. I personally think this has gone too far because it's an impossibility to ensure that the system can't be gamed by somebody 3 levels down, an absolute impossibility. And if you're going to send somebody senior to jail because of that, then I think the law is wrong. I think people are not worried about that yet because there haven't been any cases of any materiality. But if you've got 1 or 2 cases, you probably get mass resignations and a lot of churn on the board. It's more back, again, I think, to feeling that the personalities of the board members, including the chairman and other key figures, are personalities you feel comfortable with. Because behaviour within a business is role modelled from the top, as we all know. And you would certainly feel safer that if you felt the chairman, the CEO, the finance director and others were people you felt were decent folks, you would have a better feeling that there isn't anything else under the woodwork that you don't know about. And the reverse is also true, of course, which is how you take care. I think it is getting difficult in Hong Kong now, which is one of the reasons why I was saying that those people who are in the pool that will put their names forward will find there's a lot of demand for their skills.
Thank you. Yes.
Do you ever advocate increasing board size for
No. American boards tend to be quite large. British boards smaller. My board is somewhere between 9 and 14. We're normally around 12, which I find very good. With that number, you can have everyone participating in a discussion. If it's, and I've been involved in boards that were 20 plus, and it was simply impossible. I also think that once you get large boards, the way that people contribute changes. They get one question ready so that they've said something, which is in the minutes. And once they've said their question, then that's fine. You get on with it. They're not engaged. Smaller boards engage people better. And I think that decisions are worse. And we all know about group decisions that a committee can take a decision that no member of the committee on their own would take. And the bigger it is, the more that's the case. And my personal view is the reason that West Kowloon is where it is you've got a series of committees, all of which have very large numbers of people who are all not really taking ownership of what happens. There's always somebody else to blame. I made my point. That type of approach to life, I think it can be very difficult with larger. Are they? 12 good men and ladies and true.
Thank you, Nick. And feel free to, you need, I know you've got another thing to go to. Yes, yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
And now the other thing. And now this thing might get to say something.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, Nick Marsh. Again, on advice for aspiring women. First of all, can you tell us a bit about the Women's Directorship Program and the impact that you've seen? I think you've run it now twice or 3 times. The impact that you've seen of the people that have gone through the program.
Does everybody know what the program is? No? Okay. Very simply, we set up a joint venture with Hong Kong University Business School. We were looking around Asia for board governance programs to advise to our clients, most of which were international companies. Genuinely couldn't find very much. A little bit in Australia, a little bit in Southeast Asia, but nothing of any substance, or certainly not anything on a global scale. So we set out starting to talk to some business schools saying, are you going to set one up? And Hong Kong, you put the hand up and said, we'd really like to do it. long story short, we then thought, hang on, one of our biggest issues and one of the things that we're very passionate about is trying to drive diversity forward. So we added the two together and created a women's directorship program, which is a global directorship program on par with Harvard and LBS and INSEAD, but purely for women executives. And the intent was to help women reach the board through giving them world-class skills and knowledge, the knowledge imparted by professors from a mixture of Hong Kong, the US, Europe, but also interlaced with business leaders from around the world, whether it's Charles Lee from Hong Kong Stock Exchange, or whether it's the chairman and CEO of Schneider Electric, or the vice chairman of GE, and so on. All of these individuals, of which each program gets somewhere between 12 and 15 world leaders coming to talk at the program. And we run 15 to 20 participants at any one moment in time, and the course runs for 6 days in 2 3-day sessions. So we've now run 2. We've had more than 30 people go through that program, and about a third of those people subsequently have gained their first board appointment, and a further third have aspired and achieved and got onto their executive committees of their own companies. So you could argue that 2/3 have made a difference to people's lives. And of course those people have made a difference to their companies that they've joined. So we set it out in order to try to move the needle by not just talking about it, not just helping companies recruit, but actually by increasing the talent pool of people who felt that they were board ready. And part of that was confidence, I think.
And when's the next one that you're doing?
So we're running the next one in Hong Kong in October, November time. And we've now committed that we'll run 2 a year in Hong Kong. And our intention now is to take the program to other parts of the world. And actually we're now going to export it from Hong Kong to places like Japan and Europe and China. So I think the program itself has been incredibly well received by boards around the world. So it's now becoming the sort of Intel Inside brand that boards recognize. So we now talk to 50 or 60 of the top 100 FTSE 100 chairmen, plus chairman here. We've got our first Hang Seng chairman, I think, talking on the program this year, Luncheon, and our intention is to increase the tempo.
Okay, Nick, staying with you. What gets you very excited when you see a CV, especially for a potential board role? And what's your advice for women who aspire to be on a board one day in terms of building their CV and honing their skills and experience?
Okay, get rid of the myth. There is no board-ready CV. Genuinely doesn't exist. There isn't this sort of miraculous concept that there is a board CV. However, there are CVs that are more appropriate for people with board aspirations. Executive CVs tend to be often 4, 5, 6, 7 pages long, incredibly detailed around the things that you've done and so on. And typically boards want to know more about the person, because it is more about the interpersonal aspects of you working within an environment. But it's also, as Nick was saying, an executive job is about doing, managing, doing, leading. A non-executive role is about guiding, counseling, coaching, and overseeing. So you need to be able to evidence those sorts of different skill sets and styles within your CV. Oddly enough, in the program I sort of share maybe 20 actual CVs of non-execs around the world. And they're all entirely different. You would never say there's a carbon copy, except they all seem to be about 2 pages long. So that's if you want to say there's a board-ready CV, it's 2 pages. But, I think that I would disagree with Nick. I do think that getting and joining an NGO board, a charity board, is a really good thing. It is more complicated, it is more painful at times than a commercial board. I don't disagree with that. But It gives people a confidence that they have an understanding of how boards operate, and it gives boards a confidence that you actually understand what not being an executive is like. And that gives a chairman a confidence that they could appoint you to be your first time non-executive on that board. So the one thing I would say is around building up your skills to be ready for the board. Executives have to have everybody has a T-shape of skill sets. And the T is quite simple. The vertical of your T is your core competency, whether you're a lawyer, or a banker, or a merchant advisor, or you're a retailer. That vertical T, absolutely critical in an executive role. You really need to understand the deep dive of what you're running. The minute you migrate up to becoming a CEO or a general manager, that T-shape broadens out at the top somewhat more. To be a board member and a non-executive board member, the vertical of that T needs to be as short as possible. Because, and Dorian, you were talking about it, a board member has to be able to rule on and advise on and discuss every single aspect that's going on in that board, whether it's financial, whether it's risk and compliance or HR or M&A or just operations. And so you can't just say, I know everything about finance, but I know nothing else about all the other things. So think about how you, over whether you're at the point of thinking about a non-executive directorship, or maybe that's 10 years, 20 years away from where you want to be, but you want to get there. Think about how you shape the skill and then how you present that skill. So if you're missing certain components to get to a nice fat T-shape, think about what skills you need. And I think development programs can help give you that, some of that knowledge and understanding. What else? The only thing I would say is, just in terms of women, and I'll address this particular point. I think it's been mentioned. In my experience and our experiences, women do tend to lean out. They don't lean in. They don't put themselves forward. Men will quite happily stick their hand up and say, I've got 50% of the skill sets necessary to do this next thing. Count me in. Whatever that might be.
Not even 50%.
Maybe not even.
They don't even look at the spec. Sorry. Sorry.
So that natural exuberance or confidence will tend to fill in the skill sets or experiences that are required. Women, in our experience, my experience particularly, will tend to rule themselves out of things unless they've got something like 80 or 90% of the skill sets required. And so, as a headhunter, I have to spend more time counselling, advising, coaching, cajoling sometimes women candidates to seriously consider opportunities. Whereas a man will go, yep, I'll do that. So I do think women do need to be more assertive, more active in putting themselves forward. And I think that is happening, for sure. But, you know, a case in point, I've just put a woman on the board of a Fortune 500. And she was less inclined. And it required some persuasion. But she finally joined the shortlist and got the job and started last month as chairman of the audit committee for that business. You know, I think sometimes it's tough. You know, people just need to put themselves forward more. And I think companies do, chairmen and CEOs do tend to put in place blinkers around background and experience and skill sets. This particular individual, on the original shortlist of 6, everybody was agreed with. On the shortlist of 4, maybe the culture and background of this person might not be right, came from the wrong country, the style of that particular country. I had to persuade the chairman, the deputy chairman, the HR director, and the lead director in this case, that actually it was a very, very strong and valid person, and that was the person that they hired. So a headhunter's job is genuinely often to persuade and encourage boards, chairmen, to think differently, which is where I sometimes do think Nick and I tend to diverge a bit on how we think about things. he's a forward-thinking chairman, but not all are. And not all are necessarily by being bad. It's just sometimes they don't necessarily think and they have to be challenged. So there aren't enough boards and chairmen in Hong Kong using external third parties. A lot do it themselves. And they tend to recruit people in their own image, or people that they like, or people that they know, or people that know their company. And that doesn't tend to change the environment and the people on the boards enough. Sometimes a third party can be more directive or challenging. But I think that's changing.
So I'm going to ask Doreen one more question, and then I'll open the floor to questions. Do you think women can have it all? That is, a very fulfilling professional life, fulfilling and happy professional life, as well as a personal life?
Oh, yes, certainly. I'm happily married, though I don't have children. I mean, in Hong Kong, as I've said before, it's very easy to get domestic helpers and hire tutors to help with the children study. In Hong Kong, studying is crazy for secondary school, for primary school. Even kindergarten students have to attend tuitions, which I think is absolutely crazy. But I do see that with the people who are working with, especially all my key female executives, they're all actually married and have kids. I'm the only one who doesn't have kids. And whenever they have kids, you know what, in Hong Kong, maternity leave is 9 weeks. 10 weeks, right?
10
sorry,
weeks.
sorry. 10 weeks. Well, I'm always encourage them to have children. I said, don't worry, I'll cover for you. I will never bother you. Will not send you email. Don't even look at emails. Have a good time, and then you make it up afterwards. You know? I always encourage my colleagues to have children. And even with my male executives, when they have children studying in Hong Kong, it's no easy task. They have to go back early to help the kids with the homework. They're doing projects for the kids. Nowadays, the projects are not for the kids, they're for the parents. It's a tough time bringing up children in Hong Kong. So competitive. So I'm going to say they're lucky, very understanding in that respect. As a female director or female key executive, I kind of sympathize with their situation, and I'll help them to plan their time. I always believe that if you want to excel at work, you have to have a very healthy body and a healthy mind. So I push them to do exercise. I actually hire funky dance teachers and I joined the class as well. It's really good for that 1 hour. You forget everything. I mean, because if you don't watch the instructor dance, you will miss all the steps. So I always encourage them to have a good work-life balance and pursue sports. And do volunteers work if they feel they have time. And our company is now engaging in a very meaningful project, the Project We Can. We're helping, right now, stage 1, we're helping 14 schools. Band 3, you know what Band 3? Secondary school. Band 3 are those schools which have the least resources and the students are supposed to be the bottom of the rank. So we help 14 schools, and I personally look after 7 myself. Ricky Wong, my colleague, looked after another 6. Another one is independently looked after by one of our tenants. And helping these school students, not only just by giving them money or sponsorship. We offer programs. We take them into our workplace to let them see that there are always windows for them. Not just, well, we're not headhunting anyone, don't worry, we're not going to a job. But to show them there are opportunities exist in the various roles in our business units. So we have security heads, we have cleaners, we have concierge, we have different roles that may interest them to take on. after they graduate. University may not be the only, and there's only 18% of Hong Kong students had the chance to go to university. So this is a very meaningful project, and all my business unit heads and my colleagues are engaging now very heavily in this project, which give them sort of, they see some meaning in not just coming to work, but helping others out, which is good. So I must say, at the end of the day, I want to have a bunch of happy people. Happy people means I'm here to help them to succeed. Success breeds success. So if I help them to achieve certain targets, exceed certain targets, I'm helping them to have success and feel personally fulfilled. So as I said, happy organization with happy men, happy women is key to us.
Great. You're role modeling the right behaviors, definitely. We'll have to get you to come back another time to talk about work-life balance. Okay, I'd now like to open the floor to questions. So if anybody has a question for either one of our panelists or for me, please do raise your hand. Tell us who you are.
Hi. Is it working? Okay. Anne LeBourgeois, Fund Global Institute. Nick, question, how does the Women's Directorship Program differ from a directorship program? In other words, what additional or content do you have, or what areas are you emphasizing, if any, that are different from just a directorship program?
Okay, so the only two things that specifically differentiate it, because you could argue that the core information that's being shared is actually how to run boards around governance and audit committees and so on. So that would be no different from what you would see in INSEAD or LBS or Harvard or what have you. But I think two big differences. One is that it is specifically for women, so the alumni that you create out of that program has been life-changing. I mean, some of the people who've been on the course have just quite specifically said, it's been a life-changing experience and I've made lifelong friends. And that alumni we're seeing is becoming a very, very powerful unit. And secondly is the fact that there are a number of very substantial global business leaders who are actively involved in the program, who are spending time with the participants and coaching them around their personal experiences of being on boards, of what it's like. So the experiences and the exposure to world-class business leaders is quite unique. I guess you could argue the third thing is it's in Asia and it's in Hong Kong. You don't have to travel to the States or to Europe to do the program. And we do have probably 50% of the people on the program are coming from outside of Asia. It's a global program, just happens to be based in Hong Kong.
Lelia Conin, consultant. Nicholas was mentioning about the retirement age, and that's the point where a man or a woman will put themselves up for a board. So is the message that we've got to wait retirement wage to be on the board? Good.
There are some professions, like the accounting firms, they don't allow your people to become. Really busy day job, there's only so much. I mean, you really do need to manage your time well so that you can fit in a board position.
Yeah, I would always only ever advise that an executive has one non-executive activity. I mean, I do know some CEOs who have two, or say sometimes even three, but they have an incredibly efficient environment that they manage to enable themselves to do that.
Question for Nick. My name is Anne Schott. I'm with Deloitte. Given the bias for women, that a lot of boards have a bias towards women, are you presenting the profiles on an anonymous basis in terms of no names and not actually indicating whether it's male or female? Is that something that you see as a good practice?
No. I don't think it's good practice at all. I think you have to work with the board and the chairman to define the parameters of the skill sets and profile, and then it is our job to ensure that we manage the client's expectations. I think to start to go down that path, I think, is a negative path, and that means that you don't trust each other. So certainly all of the boards that I work with and that we work with, you have that trust, and therefore you end up ensuring that at least a third of your shortlist are made up of women.
Would you not set a set of criteria?
Of course you do, yes.
Yeah. So,
and that's my point, that you work with the board to establish the criteria. Once you've established the criteria, that's your benchmark against which you're going to then assess all of your candidates. But the 30% Club, which is quite relevant, the 30% Club have encouraged both chairmen and executive search firms to modify what that benchmark might look like. Historically, it used to be around tenure, age, the amount of experience, and that typically would then favour men, because most women do not have the tenure, the age, the experience, and so on. So there is now a substantial encouragement to level the playing field by taking out that element which says you must have 45 years of experience in X, Y, Z. Now that that's been taken out, certainly in the UK and parts of Europe, you find now that the shortlists are substantially more balanced. And so at the moment, I think most shortlists are made up of at least 1/3 women.
I think that, Mark Geary from HKEx Group, the companies can actually do a lot more for themselves in developing board members, whether they be male or female. But the management committee is an excellent sort of grooming ground for bringing people through. Now, I think one of the changes we've seen over recent years, which I think is mitigated against even having board directors, is the growth of the independent director. And in some areas you've seen a slimming down where you have a majority of independent non-executive directors and just a smaller number like the CEO and the CFO forming the board. But the management committee itself is a great opportunity to bring people through. It also provides you within that structure to rotate promising executives through there for a period, just even maybe for 2 years, to gain experience. So I think that there are opportunities that's available if companies will only start to do it, to develop people for those senior roles. Because I think in many companies, the management committee is as important and sometimes more important than the board.
Very good point. Thank you. Okay, thank you so much to Anne-Marie and AmCham for having us.
Thank you all very much for coming today. I'm not going to belabor our thanks because we all need to head back to offices in the rest of the day. But thank you all very much for coming. Thank you very much to our panellists. Thank you, Fern, for moderating. Doreen, thank you very much for sharing your experience. It's been fascinating to hear about your career with WARF. And Nick, thank you very much as well. We have a small token of our appreciation. Thank you, Fern. Thank you. Doreen, thank you very much. And Nick, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody.